and self-existent cause. This one manifests itself in and through all creation, but is not absorbed by its creation. The manifest universe is the body of God. It is the logical and necessary outcome of the infinite self-knowingness of God. We believe in the incarnation of the Spirit in everyone, and that all people are incarnations of that one Spirit. We believe in the eternality, the immortality, and the continuity of individual soul, forever and ever expanding. We believe that the kingdom of heaven is within us, and that we experience this kingdom to the degree that we become conscious of it. We believe the ultimate goal of life is to be a complete emancipation from all discord of every nature, and that this goal is sure to be attained by all. We believe in the unity of all life, and that the highest God and the innermost God is one God. We believe that God is personal to all who feel this indwelling presence. We believe in the direct revelation of truth through the intuitive and spiritual nature of humanity, and that any person may become a revealer of truth who lives in close contact with the indwelling God. We believe that the universal spirit, which is God, operates through a universal mind, which is the law of God, and that we are surrounded by this creative mind, which receives the direct impress of our thought and acts upon it. We believe in the healing of the sick through the power of this mind. We believe in the control of conditions through the power of this mind. We believe in the eternal goodness, the eternal loving kindness, the eternal givingness of all, of life to all. We believe in our own soul, our own spirit, and our own destiny, for we understand that the life of all is God. Now, if you would please look on the screen or the front of your program for the affirmation, and let's say it together with power. I see the good of God in myself, in others, and in all things. As I pronounce every experience good and of God, error disappears, and only the good remains.
If you get to know me, you find out that handouts follow me everywhere. So you should have a handout in your bulletin, and that's what we're going to use as a source. I love to speak in church. Both my parents are ministers. My father has passed on. My mother is in her 90s, but still alive. And they both went to the Methodist mainline Protestant denomination to do their spiritual work. And then when she retired, my mother, who had been secretly studying metaphysics all these years, became a science of mind practitioner and joined the church in Delaware that was in Stanton at the time. And so I love this phrase. I heard my father say it many times. It was one of his favorites. It's going to start with, "This is the day which the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." It's from the Psalms. And so one of the things I want to say is that if there is any reason why today you feel there is some reason why you can't rejoice and you can't be glad, then you have forgotten who you are. And you have forgotten who we are. You have forgotten that there is not two powers, there is only one. You have forgotten that this is a spiritual universe. You have forgotten that God is all there is. If you look at the second verse there, commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. And so if you don't feel that in your daily life, in any way, shape, or form, that you are committing your way unto the Lord, and Lord in his law, metaphysically, trusting also in him, which is the presence, metaphysically, and he shall bring it to pass. That's the Father within. And so when you commit your way into the law, and you trust also in the Spirit within, and then the Father within shall bring it to pass. In science of mind, we call it the Father, Mother, God. This next statement is from a reading in 2014 Science of Mind magazine. It was October 2nd. When you say there is one life and this life is God, you have made an abstract statement about a universal principle. But when you add this life is my life now, you have consciously connected this principle with your own experience. And this is important. It's not just an interesting philosophical thing, that in order for metaphysics to come home and roost in your barn, you have to make it yours. You can say all the wonderful affirmations in the world, but until you make them yours, they have no power in your world because you haven't given them power. Dan Custer, a Science of Mind person from years back, used to say, you have to believe that good is possible, and then you have to believe that it's possible in your life. And then you have to believe that it's happening. And then finally, you have to believe that it has happened, and then it will happen. And so healing is simply coming into that consciousness, that awareness, that this is the truth, that the good exists, that it's possible for you personally, that it is happening for you personally right now, and then you have to enter into the awareness that it has happened to you already, that it is already true, and then it will unfold. Because you get the consciousness first, and then it happens. The power that creates exists before we use it. However, it can give us only that which we mentally take, and often our unbelief becomes our acceptance, our fear, a misplaced faith. And in today's world, with all the turmoil that's going on right now because of the change in administrations and their different points of view, there are a lot of people who are afraid. It's very easy to listen to the news and get yourself upset. And at that point, your fear becomes a misplaced faith because you are now believing that something bad is happening and impacting people around you and perhaps even yourself. And that is a misplaced faith because at that moment, you are praying for that to happen with your fear. And so you have to change that. If you are practicing metaphysics, he continues by saying, we bind ourselves by the very power which could as quickly free us. And the way I like to say it is God loves us so much that he makes all of our dreams come true, including our bad dreams. We have the free will to decide what we shall dream. And if we are afraid, if we are angry, if we're depressed, we're having a bad dream. And God will make that dream come true because God does not judge our dreams. It simply brings them into fruition. We should increase our receptivity and have a greater faith if we wish to experience a greater degree of livingness. Our bowl of acceptance must be held up so that the outpouring of Spirit may be measured into our individual experience. This is from Mind Remakes Your World. And this was in 1941, and you all know what was going on in 1941. It was another chaotic time when things were in turmoil, and there were a lot of events in the world that appeared to be very terrible. And for some of the people experiencing them, it literally was terrible. So the question is, with all this turmoil and negativity, and we get the New York Times and read it every day, and how can I read the New York Times and declare that all is well? Well, there's a reason for that. And that's why I called this sermon, God Feels Good. So if you look down at the pure metaphysics of it all, point number one, the energy of God feels good when we pay attention to it in a pure way. And since the energy of God is all there is to pay attention to, our task is reduced to paying attention to life in a pure way. And you have already heard from the practitioners who are leading the service today this message, this idea that all is well, that life is good, that even amidst all the news and turmoil and craziness and chaos and who knows what's going to come, somehow underneath it all, it's all good. So what we have to change is not world events. We can't go out there and adjust the world. We have to change our way of seeing. We have to see the world through softer eyes. We have to see the world through the eyes of God. So our task is to pay attention to life in a pure way. Now, another thing we often say in Science of Mind is God is expressing in, through, and as us. So point number two, if we are all God expressing as, then it is God as us that feels good when we pay attention to life in that pure way. If we forget who we are no longer paying attention in that pure way. So then God as us feels bad. We're using the energy of God, which is a good energy. I feel a good energy, and we're using it to feel bad. When we let ourselves get depressed, angry, or fearful. So once again, our task is reduced to paying attention to life in a pure way. So if all of that is true, then our next focus is, all right, so what does it mean to pay attention to life in a pure way? Point number three, paying attention to life in a pure way is simply remembering that God is all there is. Now, if you go to a practitioner, they live in that consciousness. And if you say, I have this drama in my life, or this symptom in my body, or this bad thing just happened to me, or I'm simply afraid when I turn on the news, they're going to say God is all there is. And you could sit there and affirm God is all there is from now until the end of time, and it would have no effect. You have to know what that means. And when you know what that means, it has power, because it takes you to a place in consciousness where you understand that God is all there is. And when you understand that, well, there is no pain in the mind of God. There is no fear in the mind of God. There is no turmoil in the mind of God. There is only peace. And when the practitioner knows peace, then because you are connected with them, because your mind is their mind, then you know peace as well. And this is also true for everyone in the culture and in other cultures and in the world throughout. And they are not remembering that God is all there is. They're remembering other things. They're remembering why they need to be afraid. They're feeling powerless and depressed, or they're feeling angry. And when you feel angry, you want to hurt, kill, and destroy. And so there are people out there hurting, killing, and destroying. And some of those people are in positions of power. And so this is what happens when you don't pay attention to life in a pure way, when you pay attention to that thing which Holmes called the race mind, which is the thought of the human race collected together, impressing itself upon the universal mind. So there's no rule that says we have to pay attention to life in a pure way. In fact, most people are not. And so they are getting the results of their consciousness. God is expressing through, in, and as them as fear, anger, and depression. And so that's what they are getting reflected back to them in the events in the culture. So why is it different in this room? Why is it different in the Science of Mind organization? Paying attention to life in a pure way is simply remembering that God is all there is, that life is a spiritual experience, and that there are not two powers, there is only one. Now, when we think there are two powers, we think there's God and the government's more powerful. Or God and ISIS is more powerful. Or God and Syrian refugee situation, and the Syrian refugee situation is more powerful. We're giving our power away in that moment. And what's really interesting is most people think that when they have changed from fear to anger, that they have become empowered. And people who are angry will say, I'm going to take my power and do something with it. And yet, fear is a weak state, depression is a weak state, and anger is a weak state. And it's a weak state for a couple of reasons. Number one, you can't think clearly when you're in anger. And there's a reason for that. Anger is an old primitive response that actually shuts off your forebrain, which is where we think clearly, because it shuts off all non-essential things. It thinks you have to go fight the saber-toothed tiger. And so you cannot think clearly. You cannot perceive reality clearly. And so you have no clue what's going on. It's a biologically engineered overreaction. And because it's an overreaction, when you're in fear, anger, or depression, you are overreacting. And so when people are in anger, they are always, without exception, overreacting. The decisions that they make are always bad decisions, and the action that they take always make things worse. And so even though it is a popular belief that anger is empowerment, it is not. It's a weak state. For example, in the sport of boxing, if you're in the ring with someone else and you want them to lose the match, get them angry and they'll lose. Isn't that interesting? In a place where fighting is what's going on, get the other person angry and they'll lose. So there are not two powers, there is only one. What does that mean? It means there really is only one power, and that power is God expressing in, through, and as everything. And that the vibration of everything, and everything has a vibration, including the planet. There is life, everything. There is no time when God began. God created time and space. So if we go all the way back to the beginning, we hear things like this, that the harvest was in the ground before the seed was planted. And what does that mean? I mean, if you go all the way back to the beginning, when did that harvest appear? Was it when the seedling appeared from the ground? Was it when the seed sprouted in the ground? Was it when that seed began to draw water and nutrients from the soil around it? Was it when the seed was planted? Was it when the seed was created? Was it in the plant that created the seed? Perhaps when we look at a tree, we're not looking at the tree, we're looking at the form of the tree. Perhaps life is the tree. Perhaps every being out there who we see, every person, is God itself. And that God is the life in them, the very life, their breath. When I was in the ashram, the first thing we learned was the name of God is your breath. And I had no idea what they were talking about. But what they meant is when you breathe, that's God. God is breathing you. And there is no other possibility. And so if you can feel the energy in this room, it's beginning to rise. And what does that mean? We're moving into a consciousness of pure spirit. And when we move into a consciousness of pure spirit, we cannot hurt or harm any other living person, because this is a consciousness that knows only the power of good. And so when we move into spiritual awareness and we realize and recognize that there is only one power, then we realize disease is not a power. And if we realize and recognize that disease has no power, then disease does not exist, because there is no power but the power of God. And this is a higher awareness than the world has. And when we move into that awareness, then disease disappears. And in fact, we realize it was never there. It was simply a pattern held in place by stress. And stress is simply a perturbation of the force, as they would say in Star Wars. And so what happens is the wind blows and a new system comes in, and there's all this different contrast as the weather goes by, and the same thing happens in the culture. Same thing happens in our bodies, and they're all vibrations, and all of these things that move through us, for example, that which appears and claims to be the power of disease. It's simply a shift in vibration. It's simply a belief. It's simply a thought that says something is wrong. And if you think the thought something is wrong long enough, something will be wrong because God creates from our thought. Every thought that we think moves into creation. It comes out of us and moves into the three-dimensional world around us as the world that we see. So point number 4, looking at the next page. All of these words, God is all there is, there's only one power, not two, they're easy words to say, but they're meaningless if you're feeling upset. As the feeling of upset dominates your consciousness and blocks your spiritual awareness by bringing up a strong feeling that something is wrong. Number 5, it is therefore our job to use meditation and other means to defuse the awful feeling that something is wrong and get you back in touch with that awesome feeling that God feels good and that all there is God. And so this next part is simply a reminder. If life does not feel good for any reason, you are out of touch with God power. Because it's impossible not to feel good when you are in touch with God power. You are caught in the trance of scarcity. It's a hypnotic trance that infects most of humanity. It has two parts to it. The feeling that there is not enough, and therefore I have to be afraid, angry, or depressed, and that I am not enough, meaning I can't deal with what's going on. And therefore I have to be selfish and greedy, or I have to be fearful and in lack, or I have to be depressed and paralyzed. So this is a trance, and it's very easy to catch it. It goes around like the cold goes around. And in fact, the cold is just another one of these beliefs. The cold is a trance of scarcity. You are not listening to divine guidance if you are upset in any way in that moment. Divine guidance never tells you to be afraid, to be angry, or to be depressed. Divine guidance tells you how to love. If you think of it, all of the great leaders, past, present, and future, have been calm people who lived a meditative life. They were in touch with divine, spiritual power. And so here's the rule. If you want your life to be good, it is imperative that you feel good most of the time. I'm not saying all of the time because we're human persons having a human experience, and sometimes when the storms go by, we're going to get caught up. In the weeks to come, you may look at the news or listen to the paper and something may grab you, and in that moment you'll feel upset. And so no one is saying that you have to feel good most of the time or all of the time. But if you want your life to be good, it is imperative that you feel good most of the time. And there's a reason for that, and that is because you are constantly broadcasting to the universe how you feel. And the universe is constantly reflecting that back to you. So if you're fearful, angry, or depressed, that is going to get reflected back to you, and your life is not going to feel good. And do it long enough, and you will get sick, guaranteed. One of the things I do as a hypnotherapist is I work with people who have chronic illness, and guaranteed they have a history of negative thinking, and they have just put negative thought out there for years and years, and sooner or later their body just couldn't get back to normal, and they catch a disease. And the culture is no help because the culture says when you get old, you get sick. It just comes with the territory. Well, they just don't know any better. It's because most people, most of the time, feel bad. And so when a doctor tells you that, they're telling you the truth from their point of view. But they're not telling you the truth with a capital T because it doesn't have to be that way. So the next thing says, there are practical ways to achieve that objective. And we teach them in this church. Science of Mind teaches ways to feel good most of the time. You get them in the standardized courses, you get them in all the different speakers, you get them in all the different workshops. There are hundreds of techniques that will take you to that place of feeling good. But you have to do something to keep yourself in that good place most of the time. Now, I just want to mention what we're going to do this afternoon. So if you haven't made up your mind yet, this workshop this afternoon will show you how to feel good most of the time. It will help you achieve that objective, and it's going to teach you a synergy. I found as a hypnotherapist and practitioner that I get the best results by taking everything I know and putting it all together, and often doing several things in succession, each of which achieves a certain result, and then when you put them all together, you achieve a bigger result. So I am a teacher of mindfulness meditation. I teach it at the national level at continuing education conferences. And so you're going to get my latest CD. and you're going to get a real big dose of mindfulness meditation. And mindfulness walks you back from the pain of life. When you are in that state of mindfulness, you are seeing what is going on and it doesn't feel bad, which is another way of saying that mindfulness puts you in touch with spiritual power. Intensive journaling is a really wonderful way of getting rid of the things that are upsetting you. And when you're done with your journaling, you feel much better already, just from letting go. EFT, we're going to do a little bit of that. That's the tapping technique where you're tapping on meridians. That's a wonderful way to get rid of negative feelings really fast. Abundance thinking. It's really important that the thoughts that you think are full of abundance. So even if you don't come to the workshop this afternoon, you need to do these things or something like these things. Because if you do these things or something like these things, you will be feeling good most of the time and your life will be transformed. So the last techniques are all from Abraham Hicks, and specifically from the book Ask and It Is Given. We use Abraham Hicks constantly as a resource. Pivoting simply means that when you know what you don't want, then you step from there to what you do want, and you do it in a way that actually begins to create it. And you can do that in just a few minutes. They have this technique called a focus wheel, which allows you to move from one state of mind to another, from things are falling apart and life is bad, to life feels good. And to do it in just a few minutes. In science of mind and other disciplines in therapy, we call it Socratic logic. It's thinking like Socrates. It's blowing up your bad beliefs. Because if you're feeling bad, there is a bad belief that is in charge of you. No exceptions. There is no bad feeling since time began that has ever had a grain of truth in it whatsoever. Because remember, being upset is a biologically engineered overreaction. So you're overreacting, therefore you're not in touch with reality. So Socratic logic blows that up. It blows up all the silly beliefs in the culture that get us all upset and in lack, and all the thoughts that go around that are called memes. Things like there's not enough, I'm not enough, times are hard, jobs are bad, things are in turmoil, this is bad, that is bad. And they all have the same result. They make you feel disempowered. They make you feel bad. And feeling bad is not the same as spiritual power. So what you do is you have to let go of these things. You have to walk them back and get back in touch with spiritual power. The focus way is a really good way of doing that. The end result of that is finding the feeling place. And finding the feeling place means you find the place of what you want and you feel it as if already true. And if you do that, then it must come into your life. It must appear in the physical world. It is law. There is no exception. And this is all fundamentally based around a core idea, which is just looking at your thoughts and saying which thought feels better. So what I want to leave you with this morning is simply the idea that the energy of God feels good. And when you're in touch with that pure way of seeing, when you're looking out at life through the eyes of God, through the eyes of Spirit, when the Spirit is operating through, in, and as you in a pure way, you can see that, you can feel that, you are a healer, you are a center of peace. People feel better just because they were around you. And you heal everywhere you go. In fact, if you become pure enough, you become as like Jesus, where the woman was healed simply because she touched the hem of his garment. So if you want to become a healer, do these things or something like these things, and continue to come to this wonderful center and all the workshops and all the speakers and all the classes, because they will teach you how to feel good most of the time. And when you do that, your life will feel like a miracle has taken place. And so it is.